Welcome, friend. Tonight we drift to Antioch in the year 1098, where a starving army has just broken a siege and a rumor of the Holy Lance has lit fires in tired hearts. In the uneasy dark after victory, 3 wagons carrying Byzantine charters, maps of the coast, and a reliquary slip away from the guarded depot. If they vanish, Emperor Alexios will call it treachery, allies will turn skittish, and the road to Jerusalem could close before the army even marches. I am Snorelock Holmes, your calm companion through history's sharp places. Before we enter the dream, tell me in the comments which city you're listening from tonight. Now breathe and rest your shoulders. I will carry the mystery for both of us. Chapter 1. Rain, a ribbon, and a Bulla. The rain came like soft fingers on the window, steady and patient. I worked by lamplight at my desk, not with urgent business, but with small mercies. A tin of old travel medals needed sorting, crossed keys, a tiny ship, a bent star that might have been a pilgrim's token. I pressed a brittle ribbon flat between blotting papers and smoothed the crease with the side of my thumb. The kettle on the hob hummed in a low, even tone. Penelope, my brown and white beagle, lay curled against my shoe, one ear folded like a page. It was the sort of quiet that gathers rather than vanishes. There was a knock, like a single tap of a spoon against porcelain. I stood, left the lamp low, and opened the door to the cool hallway. No visitor waited, only a small oiled paper packet beaded with rain and a single thread of red wax across the flap. Whoever left it knew how to leave a straight line. A faint smell of sea and cold iron rose from it before I even brought it inside. At the desk, I loosened the red wax with a thumbnail so thin it frayed like silk. Inside lay a round of lead no wider than a biscuit. A Bulla, a seal that once pinched leather thongs through the knot of a ribbon to proclaim a document's authority. Its face showed a worn imperial device, the kind you learn by touch as much as by sight. The monogram of Alexios, Emperor of Byzantium, letters bound like a careful net. On the reverse, I could feel, not just see, a shallow scrape where a tool had slipped at the edge. The lead was old and honest, with that dull grey, the colour of rain clouds. There was also a slip of parchment, neat Greek hand, written by a man who trains his letters the way a captain trains horses. A small smear of brown near the edge suggested a hurried seal break. I read the message out loud to myself, slow and steady, so the words would sit well in the room. Bear witness, kind stranger. The night took our wagons from the depot outside Antioch. 3 carts, 12 mules, charters and maps bound in purple, and a reliquary that had been entrusted to us to show the princes. I fear a trade of truth for paper. If they sail from St Symeon, the blame may break what victory has bound. I am Niketas Phokas, chartophylax, and I have no sword, only a seal press and a prayer. The script tightened at the end, as if the writer hesitated over each letter. Chartophylax is a custodian of documents, an archivist, one who handles the emperor's words the way a smith handles his hammers. The lead Bulla in my palm felt heavier with his note beside it. A smaller wrapping inside the packet held what looked like dirt. Not any dirt. It was a smudge of silt the color of strong tea. I lifted it to my nose, briny. Not the clean salt of open sea, but the murk of a river that has held many hands. I thought of the Orontes, the river that runs past Antioch to the harbor of St Symeon, taking reed pollen and mule sweat down to the tide. The smear grain had grit to it, the kind that bites wood and never leaves a cartwheel the same. Behind me, Penelope stirred, then resettled with a long sigh. I murmured, "Quite right." The kettle clicked as the water reached its patient boil and stayed there. I poured a small cup and added a ribbon of honey, letting the spoon rest against the rim with the soft clink of balance. I turned the Bulla over again. The scrape along its edge was not an accident of age. Someone had pried a seal off a cord in haste, slipped once, and corrected. It meant hurry where calm was required. It meant someone was not afraid to touch imperial things. That is the first rule of clues. Note what people are unafraid of. A child of paper fears almost nothing in paper, but everything outside of it. A sailor fears very little on a dock, but is shy of a throne room. The person who handled this bulla moved comfortably between cord and wax and ledger. A drop of water ticked from my coat hem to the floor. When each sound has a path, a stranger's footstep jumps out. It was only the house settling, just the night turning a page. I read the note again. The time was clear, even if he did not write it. A convoy would be leaving in a handful of days, the port 6 miles downriver. Documents risking exchange, a reliquary missing, wrapped in purple. If a reliquary disappears, murmurs become church bells, and bells can summon soldiers. To someone else, this would be an invitation to worry. To me, it was a clear clock and a calm task. The stakes were as high as any I had carried into sleep. If the charters were replaced with forgeries, Emperor Alexios could claim treachery by Latin princes like Bohemond of Taranto. If Alexios pulled back his ships and grain, the march toward Jerusalem in 1099 might halt before it began. The reliquary, small as it might be, could sway a council or settle a quarrel. A holy object is a match in dry brush. I folded the packet's paper once, gently. I placed the lead bulla in my palm and let its weight settle into my fingers. It felt cool, the way a key feels before it finds the lock. Outside, the rain went on, soft and even. I said aloud, for Niketas, and for you. Yes, I'll come. The room did not change. I did. Chapter 2. Letters. Silt and the road to St Symeon. I cleaned the face of the lead bulla with a breath of steam from my tea. The veil of moisture caught in the tiny pits and then slid away, and a faint detail surfaced. A small nick just inside the rim where a prying tool bit and skated. Not a dagger, too dull a mark for that. More like the thin edge of a narrow lever, the kind a clerk might keep to lift hardened wax without cracking a ribbon. A careful man had worked in haste. Inside the packet was a strip of parchment that had once been stitched or tied to something heavier. It was a fragment of inventory, written in Greek that kept its feet under it, each letter touching the next like stones across a stream. I read it, one line at a time, speaking softly. 3 carts, 12 mules, bags of barley, 8 bundles marked chrysobullon, 5 portolani, coastal maps, 2 reliquary wrapped in purple cloth, seal press of bronze, 1. A chrysobullon is an imperial charter. The name means golden sealed document. The emperor's highest orders often wore gold seals. But most charters in motion, especially when moving through muddy roads, traveled under less precious protection, leaden bullae, until they sat again in clean hands. Names of cities and harbors traced on maps, a reliquary in purple. Not because purple is magic, but because purple says, do not throw this on a cart and forget it. It says, someone will ask to see this opened. There was also the silt. I pinched a grain between finger and thumb and rolled it. It did not powder, it scratched. Riverbed heaviness, mixed with a faint smell of brine and something vegetative, a whisper of marsh grass. I've walked enough banks to know where a river remembers its tide. 6 miles below Antioch, the Orontes widens and slows near St Symeon. Merchants say Suwaydiyah. Latin tongues say St Symeon for the nearby monastery. There the river meets the sea, and carts grow slow and men grow careful because wet road keeps secrets poorly. Wheels chatter as they hit corduroy logs laid in soft places. Silt climbs onto axles and rides home with you. I set the inventory down and spoke to you as I would to a friend across the table. The First Crusade, 1098. Imagine the city of Antioch after 8 months of hunger. The Crusaders capture it by treachery. Bohemond makes a deal with an Armenian tower guard named Firuz. Almost at once, Kerboga of Mosul arrives with an army to take it back. The Crusaders are trapped inside the walls they just took. Then a Provençal visionary, Peter Bartholomew, claims to find the Holy Lance, the spear that pierced Christ, buried in the church of St. Peter. The relic electrifies the camp. They march out and break Kerboga's army. It is a victory, with the smell of miracle and the sound of men starting to quarrel again once the shouting is done. Bohemond claims Antioch for himself. Raymond of Toulouse wants the army to move on to Jerusalem at once. Emperor Alexios, back in Constantinople, expects the cities recovered to be returned to his empire. The Crusaders swore oaths to him. They now shift in their saddles when reminded. Between them run the Italian merchants who have eyes on harbors along the coast. Amalfitans, Pisans, Genoese, they measure tides and futures. Charters, properly signed and sealed, decide who can dock where, who pays which taxes, who has the right to trade without fear of confiscation. Every line and letter is a coin, now put into that stew, an archivist like Niketas Phokas. He is a chartophylax, a keeper of charters and seals. His job is to bring to Antioch the emperor's written promises and conditions, to show the Crusader leaders, and to affirm that the alliance still lives, safe passage, supplies, perhaps even ships, when the time comes to move down the coast. He also bears a reliquary wrapped in purple, entrusted to him to show diplomacy in the scent of holiness. You can change a man's mind with a paragraph. Some men require a relic. And now, 3 wagons vanish from a guarded depot outside the city. Not burned, not smashed, vanished, quietly. That word matters. Quiet theft is almost never a soldier's habit. Soldiers are noisy, they need to be seen. Quiet theft belongs to men who do not want a bruise on the timeline, just a line moved 2 finger widths to the left. I considered the scrape on the Bulla's edge, a quick removal. If you wish to alter a charter, say to replace an original with a forgery, you must be exact. You must have seals, waxes, cords, inks, and a hand practiced in imitating the way a clerk formed his A's and his N's after a long day. You must also have a place to work that does not smell like smoke and fish and wet boards. Somewhere like a crypt or a hospice chapel or the back room of a notary who keeps incense and mastic resin for scented wax to deter moths and delight patrons. If the packet Silt is from St Symeon's marsh lanes, then the road after dark was the river road, travelled by men who know the river's hum. I set the Bulla beside the tea and reached for a pencil. I drew a small triangle to stand for Antioch, a line for the river, a tiny box for St Symeon. Between them, I marked 2 halting places where carts often stop, the date grove where the road bends, and the salt pans where the tide bites. I wrote 3 nights until convoy sails. It was not an exact count, but the tone of the note told me we had that narrow window. In a port, everything either happens before dawn or does not happen at all. A case like this has a villain, but often not the sort who waves a sword. More likely, a clerk who signs with a flourish and wears a ring that doubles as a seal. Amalfitan, perhaps, or another Italian, clever and practiced in the law of ports. If he is doing this, he will not destroy the originals. He will hide them until his forgeries, identical in hand and stain, are in the right chest under the right seal. Then the chests will travel with the convoy, perhaps to Cyprus first. And by the time anyone compares texts carefully, the army will be far along the coast, and the arguments will be old news. That is how quiet damage works. It lets time do the pushing. I lifted the silt again, smelled the sea under the river. I could almost hear gulls in the hollow of the room. Penelope's paw tapped once against my shoe. She did not wake. "We'll be gentle," I promised her, and myself, and the man whose careful hands wrote that plea. "We'll go softly and see clearly." Chapter 3. The Pipe, the Tide, and the Gate of St. Paul. I accept cases the way a mill accepts water, by opening the sluice and letting the wheel turn. I loosened my tie, the brown wool one that keeps its knot without a thought. I dimmed the lamp until the flame went from a stance to a curl. I took down the pipe from the mantel, the one that tastes of cedar, and a faint hint of old books. I tamped in my proprietary blend, tobacco for warmth, valerian root for the soft edge, poppy seeds for the gentle haze, and a minuscule dose of nightshade, the kind that nudges a door but never forces it. Don't try that at home. Even dreams need clear boundaries. I set the lead Bulla in my left palm, cool and heavy, and rested my right hand over it, the way you shelter a match from the wind. 3 deep breaths, in through the nose, long and smooth, out through the mouth, even longer, like setting a boat into still water. The first pull on the pipe drew a low, sweet smoke that tasted of moss and a hint of clove. The second softened my shoulders. The third slowed the room until I could hear the clock in the next room, a slow heartbeat, 2 walls away. The hearth crackle became distant campfires. The kettle's soft hiss lengthened into the hush of surf against a beach you cannot yet see. The arms of my chair roughened into the right-hand board of a cart, the way old wood presses a permanent memory into your palm. The rain on the window emptied out and returned as fine sea mist. Somewhere, a bell sounded, not a church bell, a small one, the kind tied to a donkey's strap so you can find him if he wanders. I opened my eyes and stood by Antioch's St. Paul's gate. The stones held the day's heat low to the ground, and the moon wore a thin veil of mist, the color of fish scales. The Orontes murmured off to my left, the noise of a river that has stories but keeps its voice down. Standards stirred along the battlement, like men shifting in sleep. A watchman coughed, then cleared his throat, the sound swallowed at once by the wall's breadth. A mule's bell tinkled once, then hushed, as if a hand cupped it. Outside the gate, ground that had recently been flattened for a depot still lay pressed and pale beneath the moonlight. There are ways Earth remembers, a darker strip where carts stood for days, a scatter of straw pressed into shallow cups, a series of deep, parallel bruises where heavy wheels had rested. The air smelled of trampled grain and the sharper scent of resin from crates that had been opened and then closed again. Farther off, the night smelled of wet dirt and a slow river taking its time. I moved like a man, unafraid to take small steps. Panic is a poor lens. I let the edges of the depot come into view in their own order. A fragment of leather thong lay half wedged under a stone, the cut end clean, not chewed, not frayed. A piece of split reed flattened under heel. Someone scuffed the ground to hide tracks, and did it with what was at hand. A few yards away, the suggestion of wheel ruts turned toward the river road and then blurred where boot soles had brushed them. A patrol of Italo-Norman sergeants passed along the outer ditch, their chain shirts whispering like rain on a slate roof. Their helmets caught the moon and threw it back in dull coins. One glanced my way with that tired suspicion that lingers after siege. Every unfamiliar face is an argument he doesn't have time to finish. I stood with my hands visible and my stride easy. A man who belongs walks differently, and in a city that has just survived a siege, the difference is the line between a nod and a spear point. From the river, a faint creak of cordage rose and fell, wood complaining softly to wood. Somewhere down there, masts moved like sleepy fingers against the sky. St Symeon's small harbour never truly slept. Even so, the hour was late. The kind of late when serious work either completes in a whisper or waits for day. I turned my face to the breeze and felt the thin grit of salt in it, a familiar distance from shore. The marsh would be heavy tonight, and the road slick. I knelt and pressed my palm to the ground. It was cool and a little damp. A low hill of earth nearby had been disturbed, not dug enough to bury anything, just enough to flatten a place where something heavy rested for a while before moving on. 3 hollowed cups in the dirt, the sort of pits buckets leave when set down in impatience. On the outer edge of the depot, a small patch of crushed date pits made a soft crunch under my heel. Food for the men working late. A cartman's supper has a flavor all its own. Date, bread, and the quiet determination to keep moving when the world says stop. The sound of the river tugged at me like a coat sleeve. That's where the path lay. But first, a breath. I closed my eyes and let the night settle on me, the way a hand settles on a shoulder. No hurry. The longer you listen, the less you need to ask. A gust, mild and damp, moved from the direction of the port and lifted my hair. It carried a smell I had been waiting for, the faint, pine-like sweetness of mastic resin, not strong enough to be a tree, more like the ghost of wax that had been warmed hours ago. Scented wax is a notary's vanity and his signature. It lingers on the air differently than common pitch. I opened my eyes and began to walk toward the river road, the ground underfoot changing from pressed earth to a subtle give that tells you when to keep your steps light and your weight forward. The moon slipped behind the edge of a thin cloud and came out again, unchanged. I adjusted my coat, checked that the packet with the Bulla sat secure in my inner pocket, and kept my eyes low, where stories live. Ahead, the path bent toward a line of dark reeds, and beyond them, the world thinned to water and the sound of ships not far away. I was here now. The case had crossed the threshold. The wagons were not far ahead in time, and somewhere in their wake walked a man who valued clever paper more than clean sleep. I did not hate him for that. I only needed the truth back where it belonged, and a reliquary to return to light that was not stolen. The night around Antioch held its breath. I took mine and let it out slowly. When the problem is clear, the solution is often just patience measured in footsteps. We would follow the tide, and before the convoy raised anchor, we would raise the seal of honesty over those chests again. For now, the reeds whispered, the river answered, and I walked into the hush that carries men to harbors and home. Chapter 4, in which salt and pitch speak. The night over Antioch was cool enough to taste, the air touched with resin from torches and the faint salt of the river. I stood at the edge of the depot, outside St. Paul's gate, where the carts had been kept, and I let my eyes drift so they would catch what tense eyes miss. Straw lay flattened in honest rectangles where wheels had once rested. The ground held conversations in shallow relief, the kind a calm mind can overhear if it waits. Drums of broken amphorae lay along a wall, sharp edges shining like fish scales. Somewhere above, a riderless saddle creaked where it hung, answering the masts downriver with a dry, wooden reply. Antioch's battlements rose behind me, but the city was no shelter for truth tonight. Patrols clinked and muttered in Italo-Norman French. They had the wiry impatience of men who had eaten well at last and didn't mean to let trouble start again. Their long knives flashed when they moved, and one sergeant's narrowed eyes followed me with an interest that would have gotten me dragged to a post on a different night. I knelt and touched the mud in the nearest rut. The mud remembered pressure and direction. It also remembered something else, brine. Brine that did not belong this far inland unless wheels had rolled through tidal flats and brought the flavor back with them. I pressed a pinch to the tip of my tongue and let it dissolve. The river Orontes had its way of speaking. It told me these wheels had kissed Marsh and returned overnight. Beside the rut lay a lead disc, battered, the sort of weight a serious desk gives to silk and ribbon. A Bulla. On the face, the monogram of Alexios, a Honninos, still frowned in neat crosses and letters. The tail of the leather thong was cut clean, not torn. That meant a blade and a steady hand, not a panicked rip. I turned it with my fingertip and found 3 tiny scrapes on the rim where someone had braced a tool to pry and test it, identical to the faint scrapes on the Bulla that had arrived on my desk at home. The past rhymed. I allowed myself a small smile and put the disc back exactly where I found it. The desertion of a single seal can tell on the whole company. I shifted on my knee and looked for the deeper scars of leverage. 3 wedge-shaped scrape marks in the drying mud, close set, on the line where a chest would slide in or out of a cart bed. Not the wide, flat pry of a farmer's bar. These were narrow, toothed, the kind a ship chandler keeps near the tar bucket for stubborn lids and coiled ropes on a pier. Port tools had been here. Portmen had been here. A dark thread lay tangled in straw. Rope fiber, blue-black with pitch. I rolled it between my fingers, and the crystals bit like sand. Salt had brushed it. This was not common hemp for hauling hay. This had been braided to live near brine. A patrol's footfalls slowed. I could feel the pause on my skin, like a change in weather. I kept my posture easy and my hands visible. "Evening to you," I said in Latin, the common bridge between armies that won't share a table. I rid the ground so I don't step in a hole. The ground was empty, the sergeant said. He spoke in a Tarentine accent and wore Boheman's badge stitched onto his sleeve. His moustache cut his mouth in 2. Then some fool made it busy. He jerked his chin at the empty spaces. "You're not one of ours." "I am one of no one's," I said, "and of everyone's, when the wrong document could make cousins into enemies." I kept my voice even, the way one handles a nervy horse. "Do I need to shift to the other side of the gate?" He weighed the choice like a man who prefers heavy sacks to light talk. "Stay in sight," he muttered and moved on. His men's boots thudded away. The danger eased but did not go. I made a slow circle of the depot, careful not to trample what the night had written. In the darkness beyond, a donkey's bell chimed once and muffled itself as if scolded. The rhythm of the river called me down. The real answer would be somewhere between torch and tide. At the far end of the yard, I found where someone had dragged straw into a path to soften the prints of mules. It works only if you keep the loads light, so hooves press but don't stamp. They had known their craft. They had even brought bundles of reed matting to lay at the gate for a clean roll into the road, and then taken them away again so no one would see a trail of reeds leading from the depot. I lifted my head. Torches winked along the road to Suwaydiyah, the port the Franks called St Symeon. Between town and sea, 6 miles of river path and marsh lane, and the world's oldest trick, move your problem to a place with more hiding spots. I breathed in, resin, distant pitch, the slow shift and creak of ships. Nothing about this was hurried. It had the careful hands of a notary and the quiet feet of men who sleep in rigging. I adjusted my jacket against the night air and took one last look at the bare rectangular shadows where wagons had once been. Then I followed the bell, chapter 5, in which a bell is muffled and a witness speaks. He stood under a scanty olive tree, a compact man with a square jaw and calloused hands, calming a dun donkey whose little brass bell had been carefully wrapped with a strip of cloth. The bell still chimed a tiny breath when the beast moved, a hint of tinkle like a memory of sound. He patted the animal's neck and glanced past me the way a field man checks the horizon in habits he doesn't even notice. "Aram of Suwaydiyah?" I asked softly. His eyes flicked up, wary. "A friend of a friend," I added. Names travel faster than men do. Niketas's note had named him as one of the last honest eyes near where the wagons were kept. Aram nodded once, a small, apologetic movement, and touched his brow. "I didn't touch what wasn't mine," he said in Armenian. Then, seeing me catch the gist but not the full nuance. He switched to slow, careful Greek, leavened with the sing-song lilt of the coast. I watched. I kept my hands on my donkey. I told no one with a spear. That was wise, I said. And now the right people need the truth. I gestured at the cloth around the bell. You muffled him. He is a good animal, Aram said, but bells tell on a man at night, and the wrong men heard enough tonight. He leaned closer. They were not soldiers. They didn't talk like men who live in camps. They didn't jangle. They moved like port hands. They had the sea inside their bones. Describe them, I said. Slowly, two carried the shift pry, the kind that bites and walks a chest without making a tearing sound, he said, one hand unconsciously miming the lever and the lift in the air. One had a lantern with a hood that turns, not one with a simple cover. He turned it as we walk a path with puddles, left, right, left, so the light never stayed on one place long. He lifted his brows, impressed despite himself. They kept the mules light, so the hoofprints would be blurred. They stopped halfway between the reeds and the salt pans to chock the wheels where the path drops. A wheel could skate there if a man is careless. You saw the chocks, one left behind. Aram untied a small wooden wedge from his belt. He passed it to me as one passes a token one has considered returning to the earth. This is stamped with the scallop shell. That is the mark of the pilgrim hospice near St Symeon. They keep wedges near the lane. They lend to anyone who asks. But the man who stamped this wood stamped them neat. A notary likes neat things. I lifted the chalk to my nose. It carried a faint, comforting sweetness beneath the tar and salt, mastic and frankincense, scented wax, not the crude lump wax of a warehouseman's candle. The warm, resinous smell that clings to papers a notary has sealed properly at a desk far from smoke. I held the wedge at an angle. Tiny droplets of wax had fallen and cooled on the wood long ago, and a careless hand here had brushed one and flattened its bead. Aram watched me read the plank like a letter. You smell it too, he said. Mastic wax, I said. Scented to discourage rodents and to leave a distinct scent for those who know it. Ink likes clean air and clean wax. A notary likes his friends to know he owns both. He reached for the donkey's ear and scratched it absently. They brought a chest with a purple-wrapped bundle too. They didn't lay it near the tar. They kept it away from the boy who carried the pitch bucket. I turned that over in my mind, the way one turns a key in a lock to feel where the pins bite. A reliquary will live away from tar and smoke. Even a thief afraid of God handles such a thing with a little more reverence than his other thefts. Or he fears the outcry if smoke stains it. Either way, the purple wrap had its own path. What did they say? I asked. Language often betrays a man when his hands are careful. They argued about where to set a chest so the tide creep would not lick the bottom, he said. One spoke Romance, like the men from Amalfi or from Bari. One answered in Greek, but the Greek had salt in it, the kind from men who learned in markets, not from school. He frowned, pulling the memory forward as if hauling a net. They thanked the hospice porter, who unlocked the side gate. He wore a shell on a cord. When they left, one said a name, Matteo. He watched my face. Matteo di Amalfi, I thought. Not a rumor now. A shape with sea-grey eyes and a waxed portfolio. A man who prefers gentle words to loud fights, and who knows that paper can move armies more quietly than trumpets. I turned the chalk again. On its lower corner, a scrape had caught and held a smear of something granular and dark. Tar mixed with sea salt. Cartwood had kissed a brush of pitch, then rolled away. Beyond, faint wheel tracks in the hardened mud bore a sheen where the salt had dried to a thin frost in the moonlight. Where did they chalk? I asked. Just before the lane bends by the salt pans, he said. Where the ground bounces if you roll too fast. I will show you. He hesitated then, eyes sliding toward the road where the Norman sergeants prowled. If I lead you near St Symeon and the wrong men stop us, they will say I am a spy. They will, if they are in a mood to say anything at all, I said, or if they need to fill a set of posts with examples. But I have a way of being small when needed, and if we walk with the river and keep to the reed shadow, their eyes will be tired and looking for other kinds of trouble. Aram's mouth twitched in that quick, apologetic smile. I will go, he said. My bell is quiet, and I know where the path lifts and where it swallows men who don't watch the tide. You will walk where I walk, and if I raise my hand, we both become stones. I have practiced being a stone, I said. Lead on. We moved out, following the soft curve of the Orontes, its murmur a deep, even breath in the night. We kept the reeds on our right and the open track on our left. Now and then, patrol lanterns peered across the land like sleepless eyes, and then looked away again. Aram's donkey stepped as asked, and the muffled bell whispered the title of a lullaby, and then went silent. Halfway to the salt pans, where the path falls away and then climbs in a nerve's length, Aram reached down. He tapped a hard-packed place. Wheel ruts, the ground held the Scallop stamp's ghost where the chalk had bit. We crouched and listened. Wind combed the reeds. Farther on, a gull muttered in its sleep. The ships at St Symeon creaked and answered, and just ahead, a lane of shadow that would take us around the hospice would also take us into a different kind of risk. I breathed once, slow and deep. We'll continue, I whispered, but we'll leave only the kind of prints the tide likes. Chapter 6, in which a shutter opens and a copy breathes. St Symeon was a necklace of masts against the thin line of sea, and in the night the beads clicked in a rhythm older than the city behind us. The tide had turned, and its quiet pool stroked the pilings where small boats bumped like animals sleeping in a pen. We kept to the dark side of sheds made of warped planks and old sailcloth stretched to the shape of wind. Aram's donkey dug its toes into the softer places without complaint, and the smell of pitch mixed with fish wrung from nets that had been pulled at dusk and now waited to be mended at dawn. Voices threaded over the water, a Pising curse, low and half amused, Greek, clipped and quick. A lullaby in Armenian sung just above a whisper from somewhere behind a shutter, the kind of duty a parent refuses to abandon even on a night when secrets move down the lanes. We edged into a fisher's shed when a patrol at the far end of the quay lifted its lantern high and called to someone invisible. The shed's interior smelled of old river, rope, and the clean iron tang that tools leave after a long day. Every surface had been used, and none was wasted. I pressed my back to rough plank and counted the patrol's steps because numbers soothe the animal in the mind and keep it from making noise. 4 steps. Stop. A throat cleared. A boot scraped. A boot scraped. The small splash of urine into dark water. A laugh. The steps resumed, moving away. Wait, Aram breathed. He held his palm in the posture he had promised. I waited. A man outside coughed. The cough didn't belong to a patrol who tries to be silent, or a thief who cannot spare his breath. It was a clerical cough, old wax and dry throat. A notary cough. It came from 2 doors down. We slid along the shed's far side and found a narrow window with a warped shutter that did not close flush. Through the crack, light spilled, warm and steady. Not patrol light, table light, work light. I pressed my cheek to cold wood and looked in. Matteo di Amalfi cut a calm figure inside, sea-grey eyes lowered, his salt-stained scarf draped carelessly but precisely, as men of the sea wear a thing both for habit and for luck. He stood at a waist-high plank set on tools, and on it lay 2 scrolls unrolled side by side. One crackled with the dryness of age. On its face, golden ink caught the candlelight in the flourished initial line of a chrysabulon, an imperial decree written in Greek that announces itself with splendor before returning to business. The other, newer, was a handsome copy, its lines even, the ducts of its letters drawn with care by someone who had made a lifetime's habit of counting strokes. Matteo held a small paintbrush by the ferrule and stirred a fleck of soot into a dish of melted wax, then dipped the tip and touched a seal on the copy so that the black ring around the impression would match the smoke stains on the original. A man who knew that readers trust their noses as much as their eyes. A man who understood that real wear has patterns. He dabbed the edge with a fingertip and then touched that finger to the back of his own wrist, feeling for tack, testing a seal the way one tests a wound for tenderness. Two porters lifted a chest from the floor, their hands positioned exactly where the pry marks in the depot had told me they'd lift, and set it down. The lid opened on hidden hinges. Inside, quill after quill in neat bundles, a small stack of blank sheets scraped smooth and ready, a bowl of sand for drying ink, a stick of dark wax pinched flat at one end by a familiar seal press. On a low bench at the room's far wall lay a purple-wrapped bundle set apart from the rest. The cloth was clean, no tar near it, no pitch, no smoke streak. It rested on a strip of white linen like a child's breath, the reliquary. Matteo lifted his hand and motioned the porters back. He leaned closer to the two texts and with a bone folder pressed fold lines so that the creases would match the original's habits. He paused to rotate both as a man might regard two strangers who look like brothers. He smiled a half smile at his own work. It was the smile of a man who loves his craft too much to hide it from himself. Then he went to his portfolio and drew out a sheet covered in a tight, trained script. He compared a phrase, consuetudines maris, customs of the sea, and on the copy, a line that had been to the ships that come by imperial grace, had become to the ships of friends who help when needed. A tilt, a whisper, a future door nudged open for a port that knew to call itself a friend at the right hour. Amalfi would profit. Bohemond would find it hard to protest if the letters were properly sealed and smelled of old mastic and smoke stain. Alexios would rage at the break in his phrasing, but would he ever see it? If a man's belly and honor are bound up in a march to Jerusalem, he might sign without reading and only taste the knife later. This was no crude theft, it was a swap in progress. The originals would be cleanly hidden, somewhere cool and respectful, a stone place that taught men to whisper. The forgeries would return to the world. Later, months hence, when someone in a hurry produced a seal and a cent to claim a right on a dock, few would challenge that the words had learned to lean in a new direction. I felt danger reshape itself. Not blades, not men, running. A quiet pressure from the future flowing back to bend the present. I watched Matteo gesture toward the purple bundle, and the porters stiffened their backs as if in church. They reached, hands careful. He stopped them with one finger. He walked forward himself and adjusted the linen beneath so it did not wrinkle. Even thieves bow at certain altars. Aram's breath warmed the board at my cheek. Crypt, he whispered. Hospice, stone steps, cool. The porter keeps the lowest key tucked in his belt string. They will put it there until the copies are finished. Our clock was a ship's clock now. 3 nights. The convoy would unlatch and slip towards Cyprus before the moon had a chance to fade. In 3 nights, paper would decide whether armies were cousins or rivals on a hard road. I eased back from the shutter. Matteo raised his head suddenly, as if hearing my thought. His lids lowered when he calculates. The profiles said, and there it was. He held that squint a heartbeat, and then turned back to his work. A stone in a stream. The water parted and resumed. Back, I whispered to Aram. We've seen enough for tonight. We moved through shadow at the speed of a cautious thought to the safety of a boathouse whose open mouth faced the river like a yawn about to become a hymn. Chapter 7. in which the clues shake hands. The boathouse was a shelter for things that needed to rest after a day's labor. Hooks hung empty and honest. Nets, dark and muscular, slumped in heaps that looked like sleeping animals. A skiff cradled in slings rocked with the slow breath of the tide. I set my lantern on a beam and turned its flame down until it glowed like a guarded ember. Light that warm does not shout, it invites thought to sit down. I laid the small items in a row on the beam. The blue-black rope fiber with its salt crystals. The chalk stamped with a scallop shell and kissed by mastic wax. The image of Primarchs I had memorized and could draw with my fingertip in the air. The recollection of the purple-wrapped bundle set on linen. I crushed a salt crystal between two knuckles and let the grainy edge tell me what it had touched. The crystal's quick melt said marsh, not sea, and the pitch on the fiber had sand in it, the kind that rubs a man's rope when he secures it to rough pilings. Speak them, Aram said quietly. People who know roads know that saying a map out loud fixes it in the body. Here is what the ground said, I began. Because the Bulla's thong was cut clean and not torn, the men who came had time and tools. Because there were 3 wedge-shaped Primarchs near a cart bed, close set, narrow, tooth-marked, ship chandlers were at the depot. Because a rope fiber there was flecked with pitch and carried salt crystals, harbour cordage brushed something on the ground. Because the mud in the ruts tasted of brine, those wheels rolled through the marsh near St Symeon and came back. Therefore, portmen, not soldiers, diverted the wagons. I turned to the chalk. Because this wood is stamped with a scallop, the hospice near St Symeon lent it or had it taken. Because there are brittle droplets of scented mastic wax on one face, a notary carrying proper supplies handled this wedge, not a warehouse torchman. Because that wax is the clean sort used at desks, and because a reliquary was kept away from soot back in the shed, the originals have been hidden somewhere cool and honorable. The hospice crypt fits those needs. Therefore, the chests and the reliquary are in the crypt. Aram nodded with each therefore. His eyes eased as logic wrapped his fear in order. And the men in the shed? Matteo Diamalfi directs them, I said. He sits between camps. He knows Latin, Greek, and the dialects of trade. He prefers quiet profit to loud conquest. He rewrites phrases just enough to create a door he can use later. He stains seals to mimic age. He tests tack with his wrist. He's proud of his hand. He keeps the reliquary clean because he knows that if even a harmless blessing is smudged, men will go mad and everything falls apart. But why risk a reliquary? Aram asked. Why not leave it? Because it provides cover and leverage, I said. He needs the wagons to move out of Antioch without a cry going up. The presence of a sacred object makes everyone step back in confusion and deference. If challenged, Matteo's men can say they are protecting a holy thing from the smoke to be kept safe in the crypt until dawn. It is the only reason a hospice porter would unlock a gate at night. And he knows envoys and princes hate to look like they mishandled a relic. So he borrowed its aura to move chests about paper. I let the picture of the shed return, the 2 scrolls side by side. The phrase consuetudines maris becoming a friendlier thing for Italian ears. He is not stealing dead coins, he is drafting living favors. If his copies sail, they will live as truth. When one day a bailiff demands a fee or a viceroy argues a right on a dock, a sealed paper will be lifted, and a man in a hurry will nod. If Alexios later cries forgery, Amalfi and others will shrug and point at backs already turned toward Jerusalem. Matteo's plan counts on sleep and habit. Aram was silent for a time. The skiff answered the tide with a tiny, contented noise. A gull who had dreamed of fish woke itself with a startled sound, then settled. The smell of wood and salt reached for my throat with a friendly hand. The Normans, Aram said then. Bohemon's men will break a foot to catch a thief if that thief stole their dinner, but they will shrug at a notary. They will call it Greek business, or they will call it sailor tricks. He frowned, and the Greeks will shake with anger that a Latin printed their letters, but they will fear to shout, because then they must admit the thing was in their care when it was lost. Each side wants not to bring shame on itself. Shame makes men do foolish things. Exactly, I said. Matteo wrote his plan on that exact pattern of shame. He wrote the place where two prides overlap and left his desk inside it. I drew a straight line on the dusty beam with my finger. 3 nights is our deadline. The convoy to Cyprus will take everything onto water. On water, paper is invisible unless something stops a crewman's hand from untying the bowline. Another line crossed it. We do not have a law that compels a seaman to set a document on a barrel and wait while 2 proud camps read every line. We have only fear and rumor to slow the hand of a man paid to sail. So how? Aram asked simply. He asked like a carter asks a hill to tell him where it is low. How do we stop a plan that is quiet? Quiet breaks in the same place that noise breaks, I said. It breaks under weight. We must put the right weight on the right hinge. We cannot arrest Matteo in the dark and shout about seals. That would make half the port reach for their knives. We cannot tell Bohemond first and hope for kindness. His men might take the papers to punish a notary. We cannot tell Alexios first, because he will write a letter and send it after the ships. We must set a hand on Matteo's wrist at the moment he lifts a chest, and we must give him a path where he does not drown. I gathered the small items and put them away, leaving the place as tidy as I found it, because the sea punishes men who leave mess where work should be. Then I turned the lantern down another breath and spoke the case aloud to fix it, not just in our minds, but in the air. Here is our case so far, I said. The imperial charters, chrysobuls, maps, and a reliquary were diverted from a guarded depot at Antioch by portmen using ship tools. They went to St Symeon, where a notary, Matteo di Amalfi, is forging nudged copies stained to mimic time. He will return the copies to the envoys under cover of respect and technical accuracy, and hide the originals, perhaps even move them on another ship later when the first noise dies. The reliquary's presence made the initial move possible, but it is also his restraint, because if he stains it with soot or scandal, everyone's knives come out. In 3 nights, the convoy sails. If the wrong papers leave, the Byzantine-Latin alliance fractures and the road to Jerusalem could close. We must stop the swap without bodies on the quay. I rubbed the edge of the lantern's hood with my thumb until the metal shone where 1,000 other thumbs had stood before mine. We will breathe. We will make a plan that keeps men alive. Good, Aram said. He set his palm flat on the beam beside mine, his calluses smooth in their own way, like bark grown right around a nail. Tell me what to do. Chapter 8, in which a plan is tied with quiet thread. It is one thing to smell pitch and taste salt and understand the shape of a problem. It is another thing to move men like water so they flood the right place and not the wrong. Plans are not magic. They are ladders built at night. Each rung must find a sound place to rest. First, I said, beginning the ladder low, we will use fear of plunder to turn eyes toward the right door at the right hour. Bohemon's men may not chase a clever seal, but they will trample a warehouse if they smell stolen treasure. We will draft a notice in neat Latin and respectable Greek. It will say that the Marshal of Antioch has ordered a thorough search of all storehouses and the pilgrim hospice at dawn, 2 days from now, for stolen plunder and false charters. Aram's eyebrows rose, but he has not, he said. He could, I replied, and rumor will not check the Marshal's personal wax before it runs to tell its brother a story. We will make the notices handsome with the right phrases and the right tone. Men who run for Matteo will carry that rumor to him because rumor is their pay. I smiled. He will not sit and admire his ink when he hears the hospice is on a list. He will move his chests earlier than he planned. That brings motion into the open, where we can step in without dragging the whole port awake. Aram nodded. A good rung, he said. The kind that will take weight. Second, I said, we will lace the lanes themselves so they whisper back to us when men pass at night. Sesame and ash, sprinkling them very thin where footfalls slide just a little on slope. Sesame will stick to soles and hooves and leave a trail like faint stars if anyone looks with a low lantern. Ash will tell me where the air has moved when a chest brushes by. A mixed line across a lane is a kind of thread most men won't see. Aram grinned a little, sudden and boyish. When I was small, I used crushed eggshell for the same trick, he said. My uncle thought I wandered too far at night. He laid it and laughed at my white toes. He tapped his sandaled foot. Sesame is kinder. Kindness makes less noise, I said. Third, we will mark the copyist's chest with a hair of soot on a string. I will tie one end to the lid, the other to the leg of the bench against which the lid leans when opened. I will paint the hair with lampblack from a very lazy flame so it coats lightly. Anyone who opens the chest will brush the thread and carry a smudge on the side of his forefinger. The smudge wipes off easily with olive oil, but not with the first sleeve he drags across it. That gives me the time to take a man's hand in mine and show the mark to him. It also gives Matteo the chance to see his work has been seen. Aram watched my hands demonstrate the knot and the length I wanted. He made a knot of his own, a different way, and then made mine again so he would remember. Fourth, I said, we will ask the hospice to make its own truth louder. I will speak to the porter, the one who wears the shell on a cord and keeps the lowest key tucked in his belt string. I will tell him that Bohemon's marshal looks for stolen saints by mistake at dawn 2 days hence. He will fear trouble and seek to avoid it. He will lock the lower door, or he will beg to be left out of it, which will make Matteo move his boxes before dawn, when no one prays before candles in the crypt. Aram frowned. The porter will accuse me of speaking evil of him, he said. I will go, I said. I am good at telling a man a thing he does not like without making him hate me, and I will not name you. I will say I smelled wax and saw shadow, and the marshal's clerk will smell it too in a day, so the porter should wipe his hands and fold his cord and pretend he never liked keys. He will believe me because he wants to believe me. Fifth, I continued, we will choose where to stand. The lane by the hospice's side gate has a shallow, deliberate dip where carts settle before a right turn. Men slow there, not because they want to, but because the ground tells their wheels to. That is where we will wait, dressed as 2 men who repair wheels at night, one with a scarf and one with old cloth around a good donkey's bell. We will hold a lantern with its hood turned down so its light kisses the ground and not the faces. Aram touched the donkey's neck. He will stand, he said, the pleasure of that certainty in his voice. He knows the dip. He has stood there for my father and me 100 nights when mules came too fast. Sixth, I said, we will tell Niketas to be awake and to bring his seal press and a cool head to the pier at first light. He must be ready to press, and he must not lecture. He must accept the originals as if they had spent the night exactly where he ordered. He will reseal and register and show no triumph. His triumph will be that no one dies and that his papers live. I will ask him to steady his mouth. Aram's quick grin returned. I have seen a chartophylax breathe like a frightened horse in a stable, he said. He will need your English calm. The way he said English fit me like a coat. I had not realized I wore. And seventh, I said, we will offer Matteo a path that does not drown him. I will name what he did in a quiet voice and in the right order, the pry marks, the mastic wax, the scallop chalk, the soot smudge on his finger, the kindness he showed the reliquary. I will offer him a thing he can keep, his copy texts, clearly marked, not as charters, but as petitions, bearing his notarial seal. He can submit them openly later to the men who like their words to earn their gold. That gives his pride a place to stand. I will also show him the trap between Bohemond and Alexios. If he refuses, he will see it. He has a sailor's eye for reefs. Aram rubbed his jaw. If he refuses, then we lift our lantern and show the sesame trail and the soot thread and the mark on his hand to a patrol and to the porter, I said. We let the two prides step on each other's cloaks for once while we stand aside, but I don't think he will refuse. He is too good at his craft to ignore a better way to keep it alive. We set to work. I wrote the notices in Latin first. Clear, clipped, smelling of the camp and the order men prefer when they are tired. The marshal of the Prince of Antioch orders a search of the storehouses, piers, and the pilgrim hospice by St Symeon at dawn, 2 days hence, for stolen plunder and false documents. Any man refusing will be judged as if he had confessed. I made the letters plain and square, nothing flowery, to make men think I was trying to sell them something. Then the Greek, in a hand Niketas would not despise. At dawn on the second day, the Lord Marshal will examine the houses by the river and the hospice for goods wrongfully seized and writings that lie. Let the faithful unlock their doors and be found beyond suspicion. The Greek needed its own music. I kept it austere. Aram took them to the places where Matteo's runners warmed their feet. The tavern with a net above the door. The well where one always finds a boy who knows who paid for which jug. The shed where oars lie at night and men with eyes like seals wait for news. We did not staple them like moderns. We pressed them into palms and left them under jugs and rolled them into the crooks of beams near the lamps where smoke stains accumulate like a signature that says the world passes here. Next we walked the lane by the hospice side gate and drew our thin line of sesame and ash. I carried a tiny bag and let my hand swing as if I had a fondness for gesturing while I explained something to Aram. The seeds fell like ideas no one noticed. The ash made a modest ribbon. A late mule appeared and vanished, its handler nodding to us as if we were simply men who liked to argue in the night. The soot thread we set on a chest in the copyist's corner when the port quieted and the moon turned its face toward a net of cloud. I went in by a door that was unlocked because a man who believes he owns the night forgets to latch it. Aram stood where I asked, blocking a view from the lane with the donkey like a slow-moving door. I tied the hair-thin thread and let it dangle just where a hand would sweep it if a lid were opened. I smudged my own finger and nodded, satisfied. I set a small, honest pebble inside the chest lid so that when the lid rose, the pebble would roll and tell me we were not imagining the movement later. Pebbles keep good records. After that, we went to the hospice. The building smelled of bread, baked early for pilgrims, and of sweat from too many thin mattresses laid too close. The porter with the shell on his cord blinked at me when I asked for a word. His head shone where hair had given up years ago, and he looked like a man who had learned to love taking simple things out of cupboards for people who needed them without giving lectures. Friend, I said in Greek. At dawn, 2 days hence, the marshal of the Prince of Antioch will look for thieves everywhere along the water. Someone told him that stolen saints and stolen papers sleep here at night. I do not say you are the man's source. I say you do not need trouble. Lock your lower door. Lose your key for a day. If you lend a wedge, do not mark the day in your book. If anyone asks, you were busy with bread. Truly, bread would be a better use of your hands. He bristled like a kind man who felt a bruise on his pride. We do not keep saints like sacks of grain, he said. Good, I said gently. Then keep them far from men who bring sacks. And on the day after tomorrow, unlock your door again and go on as before. I turned to leave and left a small candle of sweet wax on his shelf. For your prayers, I said. That ended that conversation where we both needed it to end. On the quay, I found a boy with ink on his hands, the sort of stain a clerk acquires and can never fully lose. "Do you know where to find Niketas Phokas, the chartophylax?" I asked. The boy shrugged with one shoulder. "He counts ships by the east pier at dawn," he said. "He speaks to no one when he counts, and to everyone when he finishes." "Tell him for me," I said, "that he has a friend who asks him to bring his seal press and a cool head to the east pier at first light tomorrow. Tell him to expect a skinny Englishman who looks like he prefers chairs to boats." The boy looked at me, then at my shoes, then at how I held my shoulders as if the world did not push me forward or pull me back. "I will tell him," he said. He held out a hand without hope or shame, as boys by the water do when messages require bread later. I pressed a small coin into it, and in that way hired fate to keep our appointment. Aram and I returned to the boathouse and rested.
Rest is part of any plan. Men who never sit alone with their own breath make noise at the wrong times. I told Aram what he would do when the donkey bell needed to speak.
"At the second night watch tomorrow," I said, "if you see chests move, you will ring your bell 3 times. Not loud, patient, once, twice, thrice. Even a tired man recognizes a pattern like that when his mind hears it, and I am an old friend to patterns. Stand where the lane meets the shadow of the hospice wall, and let the bell do its work. Then lead slow, as if a wheel needs your hand. I will be in the dip. Matteo will walk behind his porters because he likes to see men do their work well. He will try to shape the scene. He will not be able to resist reminding someone not to scuff the linen. That is when I will speak his name." Aram set the bell's cloth around it again and touched it with respect. He did not tremble. He had chased night carts and steeled mules long before I dreamed my way into his road. "I will be there," he said. "I like plans that do not end with someone's cousin screaming." "Then sleep a little," I said. "Tomorrow night we make a hole in a net and invite a fish to jump out of it by himself. And we do it quietly enough that the man who made the net does not want to mend it with blood." We lay in the boathouse where wood creaked and water stroked the small holes, and our lantern fell into the easy rhythm of its own gentle draw and flicker. Outside, the port spoke in its small night voice. In my coat, I kept the weight of the plan and the feel of wax under my thumb, and I let sleep step down into my bones like a friendly ferryman lowering a boat to calm water. We had tightened the threads that needed tightening. The rest would be timing, and timing, like tide, likes a man who watches and waits. Chapter 9, in which a bell rings thrice, and ink yields to light. Night settled like a shawl over St Symeon. The masts clicked softly against their stays, and the tide carried the Orontes out to the sea with an even, shouldering hush. I waited in the shadow of a low wall of river stones, a place where driftwood and old rope had settled like sleeping snakes. My lantern was shuttered to a small, warm oval. The fog came in fine and even, carrying the smell of pitch and fennel from a cookpot I could not see. Aram's bell was our agreed sign. 3 gentle notes, even as a lullaby. Somewhere down the lane that edged the hospice yard, the first chime rolled, clear and small, then the second. I rested a hand against the wall, feeling the cool grit in the stone. The third bell sounded, answered by the dull thud of a chest against a cart bed. The lane woke in pieces, a mule's wet snort, rope sliding, men whispering in the Neapolitan-laced romance, common in the port. I stepped out when the shadows resolved into men. 2 porters shouldered the back end of a chest by its rope handles, their boots landing sure and silent on the caked mud. Behind them walked Matteo d'Amalfi, his blue scarf dark with mist, signet ring turned inward against his palm as if hiding its star even from the night. His posture, as ever, was balanced, sea-trained, and his eyes lifted the way a helmsman lifts his eyes to read a cloud. "Good evening, Signor Matteo," I said, keeping my voice low and even. I raised the lantern until the men's faces warmed in the glow. "If it comforts you, You may think of me as a reader of small things. The porters froze first, trained by years to read danger in tone rather than blade. Matteo did not freeze. He paused, turned his head a fraction, and smiled the kind of smile that acknowledges a board has just been laid across a gap. He tipped his head, studying me through the yellow oval of light. "I prefer to think of prophet as the best reader," he replied. "But the night is long. Speak then." I did not raise my voice. Sleep likes calm. Truth does too. 3 wagons left the depot outside Antioch, under imperial seals meant to tell a clear story. Alexios Komnenos holds the coast by law and charter, and the princes of the First Crusade owe him what they promised. I set the lantern on the ground, the light spread across his boots and the chest's corner, catching a faint soot line. The seals were cut cleanly. The pry marks on the crate boards were wedge-shaped and close, not the broad bite of a carter's crowbar. Ship chandler's tools, used by hands that know they must not splinter what's inside. He lifted his right hand without quite meaning to, a small reflex of pride at good workmanship. The gesture exposed his fingers. The middle finger bore a faint, smoky smear at the inner knuckle. "On your fingers," I said gently, "a thread of soot." It lay across the lid of a chest in the copyist's corner. Anyone opening it tonight would wear the mark in the very place you now carry it. The porters glanced at his hand, then at me, then back down at the chest, as if it might speak up and defend its handler. Matteo's eyebrows rose, then they descended, slow as tide, and he folded his marked hand against his cloak. "I could say I brushed a chimney," he said. "You could," I agreed, "and I could say the wooden wheel chock, stamped with a scallop shell and flecked with mastic-scented wax, turned up in a chimney. But the hospice of St Symeon keeps those chocks, and a notary's scented wax is not in the habit of climbing flues." I nodded toward the lane, where Aram had faded back into fog and shadow, a good witness, knowing when silence helps. "You kept the reliquary apart, wrapped in purple, away from pitch and smoke. That tells me you intend reverence of a kind, your own rules, not the mob's. You would not allow it to be ruined by careless hands." Matteo considered that. He let the smallest breath go between his teeth. His half-smile returned, gentler this time, almost weary. "You see too much for a man I have never met." "That is my work," I said. "And my work tonight is to keep a war from being born in paperwork. You will forgive me if I name things plainly. You are preparing forgeries. They are meticulous. You test the color of wax against the light. You measure the lay of Greek hands and Latin corrections. You intend to return altered originals that favor Amalfi's customs on this coast, and keep the true charters safe until the tide and some distance protect your enterprise." A gull called once, thin and far. The men moved slightly under their load, a muscles tremor asking for release. Matteo lifted a hand, and the porters set the chest down with care on the flattened mud. The mud was no longer smooth. I had laced the lane with a thin scatter of sesame and ash so footprints would whisper even to the careless. Beneath his boot, the mixture registered a deep, clean oval. The ash made it almost silver in the lantern's glow. A second heel print beside it was narrow and angled inward, the gait of a man who had spent years on a deck fighting invisible role. The place remembers everything when you ask in the right way. "What happens if I say no?" he asked. Not belligerent, curious. The question of a man who prefers to map the whole field before walking. "If you say no," I answered, "I bring both ends of this rope into the same hand. Bohemun's sergeants are a short shout away, and the imperial archivist, Niketas Phokas, waits at dawn with his seal press. One power thinks you are robbing the empire of its letters. The other thinks you are compromising a march to Jerusalem that has already bled itself thin at Antioch. They will not agree about much, but they will agree about you. You will be crushed between them, not quickly." I kept my voice soft. There was no need to sharpen it. The picture was sharp enough. And the reliquary, which you have kept clean, will be dragged into the courtyard and poured over like a spice sack by men who care about tomorrow's rations more than what it represents. He glanced toward the hospice. A dim lamp burned within, steady and clean. The scallop mark on the lintel took the lantern's glow and threw it back in a soft curve. He did not look at the porters. Men like Matteo keep their faces forward when making decisions, because authority can look like confidence even when it is only calculation. "And if I say yes," he asked, "then tonight ends with the quiet it deserves," I said. "Aram will put his donkey to the chests and roll them to the pier. You will walk beside us as a man who prevented a quarrel, which is a kind of honor if you choose to claim it. Niketas will reseal the true charters at dawn and make a clean entry in his register. You will keep your copy texts, your fair transcripts, under your own notarial seal as the petitions they actually are, to be argued in daylight later. You will not pretend your copies are originals. You will walk away with your reputation intact and your bones unbroken, and the road to Jerusalem will remain open for a little longer, because the alliance between the Latins and the Byzantines will hold the shape of trust, at least by morning." Matteo's eyelids lowered at the word petitions. It was not a loss, but the acknowledgement of a boundary. In a different year, a different harbor, his gambit might have slipped through and hardened into custom. But this was Antioch's back gate, with the breath of Kerboga's defeat still warm and the worry about Emperor Alexios still bright. He lifted his hands as if to warm them at the lantern, though it gave little heat. I could see the soot fleck on his middle finger, a comma of night, where he had not planned to carry it. He rubbed it with his thumb, then let his hands fall. "You ask for honesty where profit sleeps, sir," he said finally. The half-smile returned, this time reaching both eyes without quite warming them. "Very well, I will not trade paper for truth tonight." He turned his head. "Gianni, Paolo," he said to the porters in their common tongue. "The chest goes to the pier, with the gentleman and the donkey with the bell. Bring the purple-wrapped piece with 2 hands, and do not set it down on wet wood." He glanced back at me. "I have treated your reliquary with care, because I am not a barbarian, whatever your Norman friends think. I will not see it harmed for a point in a ledger." The lane breathed again. Aram stepped forward out of the fog with a quick, apologetic smile and the small brass bell in his hand. He tied it back to the donkey's rope so it would sing softly as we moved. The animal flicked an ear and leaned into the traces with the calm of a creature that knows how to pull in the dark. We moved as a quiet procession. The porters lifted the chest. Matteo walked on the left, I on the right. Our steps made shallow prints in the ash and sesame, a temporary script that would be gone with the morning damp. The hospice door opened and a lay brother carried out the purple-wrapped bundle. He held it as one holds a sleeping child. Matteo gestured and the man gave it into Aram's hands. Even in lantern light, the thread of gold upon the purple binding caught like a small star. We did not speak of what lay inside. It was enough to know it had traveled far and would travel farther, its meaning drawn from 1,000 minds in argument and prayer. The point of my work was not to settle what the reliquary meant. It was to keep its story from being bent by ink and night. At the pier, the river slapped the pilings with slow persistence. A few fishing boats rode at their lines. Larger hulls sat just beyond, their pennons limp with fog. We set the chest down where timbers were dry and steady. I took a breath that tasted of salt and damp rope, and then I looked back at Matteo. "There will be noises in the morning," I said. "Men who like drama will make some. Keep your eyes level. Walk as if you have given something back to the day." He nodded. "And you, Signor?" "I have given sleep back to a few hundred men who do not know my name," I said. "It is payment enough." He looked at me, measuring that, and I saw in him a man who would always run his thumb along the edge of an opportunity to feel how sharp it was. Tonight, he had chosen not to cut, and I would not make him regret it. He touched his scarf like a small salute and stepped back into the mist. Aram shifted the purple-wrapped bundle to his left arm and tugged the donkey a little to the right, so its hooves found the dry planks. The bell made a low, contented note. We secured the chest and the reliquary with rope that did not smell of tar. A small thing, but the reliquary deserved clean fibers. "Good man," I said to Aram. He ducked his head, a quick smile running across his face and leaving it calm again. "We will wait here for the light." The river kept its steady talk. The night did not hurry. Chapter 10, in which lead cools, seals set, and the road stays open. Dawn came slowly on the coast. The fog let the light through grain by grain. First, the pier posts pulled away from the dark. Then the ropes showed their twists. Then the gulls woke and sketched themselves into the air with their scratchy, contented calls. It smelled of wet timber, fennel, and just the edge of smoke from cook fires on the far bank where the first porridge thickened in a battered pot. Niketas Phokas arrived in a mantle with a purple edge and a face drawn thinner than the night before. His ink-stained fingers were clean for once, as if he had spent the last hour scrubbing up for a small surgery on the skin of history. He carried the bronze seal press at his belt and a narrow register under his arm, wrapped in a scrap of oiled cloth. He saw the chest and the purple-wrapped bundle and let out a breath, the way a man sets down a heavy box without dropping it. "Mr. Holmes," he murmured, dipping his head. His voice never came above conversational. The fog and the moment demanded no more. "You have my gratitude, and the city's, though the city does not know to offer it." "I am fond of quiet thanks," I said. "They do not attract flies." We worked. Niketas checked the leather thongs threaded through the chestboards. He ran a practiced finger along the break where the imperial Bulla had been pried and cut. The triple scrape marks stood out faintly like the echoes of a bird's feet in dried clay. He made a neat note in the register in Greek, the letters slim and steady. Then he took out a length of new thong, supple and slightly sticky with the oil he had rubbed into it at dawn. He threaded it through the holes, guided it with a narrow bone spike, and tied a careful knot, just loose enough to take a seal. He opened the seal press. Inside the bronze jaws, the image of Christ and the imperial monogram of Alexios the Fist Komnenos faced each other in reverse. He slipped a blank disc of lead between the plates, warmed it briefly in his palms, then set it over the tied thongs. The press shut with a measured squeeze. When he opened it, the lead bore the calm faces and the marks that mattered. He touched the edge with his nail to be sure there were no ridges that could confuse an honest eye later. He made a second Bulla for a second thong, because redundancy is the soul of trust in a world of knives. While he worked the charters, I stood beside the reliquary and watched the light climb it as it lay, still wrapped on a clean plank. Niketas waited until the seals cooled, then lifted the purple bundle as carefully as a fisherman lifts a net with a rare catch and set it back inside its crate. He checked the interior, wiping a stray bead of moisture with a clean cloth. He did not ask to view the contents. His duty was to ensure its passage, not to gaze. "Your notary?" he asked, glancing up only once from his work. "Has chosen wisdom over speed," I said. He nodded, and I saw the tension go out of his mouth. "I will make a second entry," he said, tapping the register with the butt of his bronze spike. "Received again at St Symeon at dawn, resealed under the authority of the Emperor's envoy, witnessed by..." He looked at me. "Your name?" "Snorelock Holmes," I said. He wrote it in Latin letters with the same neatness, adding the words testis quietus, quiet witness. He closed the register, wrapped the oiled cloth around it, and tied it with a precise bow. He was a man who liked knots that could be untied without a knife. Footsteps sounded at the far end of the pier. A cluster of Italo-Norman sergeants passed at a distance, spears up, cloaks slung. They checked the boats with the practiced suspicion of men who had seen too much pilfering at sieges. One of them paused, looked over at us, and recognized the purple edge on Niketas' mantle. He grunted something to his fellows, probably nothing more than imperial business, and they let their line of search tilt away from us. I did not wave. The morning was too delicate. I kept my hands in my pockets and felt the warm smoothness of my own old pipe stem. Soon the coastal convoy's crews began their measured hurry. Men hoisted water casks, rolled them with their palms flat so the wooden hoops did not catch. A ship's boy sang under his breath, something in Provençal about a girl who would not dance. Ropes creaked. A sail went up in slow folds like a curtain opening on a stage. A man in a Flanders cloak argued gently with a Greek pilot about the tide, and then both laughed because the tide is never really interested in our debates. Niketas placed a small folded slip inside the chest, a tidy memorandum cross-referencing his register. He looked up once more. "You have bought us the day," he said. "Tomorrow I cannot promise, but today the alliance between the emperor and the princes still stands in front of the sun, not behind it." "That is the nature of alliances," I said. "They live from dawn to dawn." He smiled a little. "You speak like a clerk when it suits you." He lifted the seal press and tucked it back into his belt. "Tell me, how did you find what the knight had tried to fold away?" "By what knight cannot help leaving behind," I said. "Pitch on rope, mastic in wax, ash treading into sesame, a bell rung thrice, by a man who does not like to lie." I inclined my head toward Aram, who stood back with the donkey and watched the gulls spin on the morning air like scraps of paper. Niketas followed my glance and gave the briefest nod of thanks, the way a man thanks a bridge when he reaches the other side. Bohemon's banner showed briefly inland through the mist, red, with a device I could not make out against the pale. It was enough to anchor the morning to a larger movement. The army would soon peel itself from its camps and start the long line south. The men would talk of waterskins and bread, of sandals and saws, of saints and swords. Most would never hear of a chest resealed at dawn and a reliquary breathing clean air for a little longer, but those quiet things would walk with them all the same. "So," Niketas said, sealing the last knot with a touch of clean wax and the press's smaller die used for secondary tags. He pressed it gently, firm, not forceful. "When you wake, do you remember the fog?" "I remember the weight of lead cooling," I said, "and the sound of a donkey's bell carrying across water." He laughed softly, the sound a kind of exhale. "You remember like a Greek," he said, which I took as a compliment, and then his eyes went back to his register, because men like Niketas live by making sure that the page and the world match more often than not. We lifted the chest, he on one side, I on the other, and handed it off to a pair of dockmen who knew the look of important boxes. The reliquary crate followed, wrapped and steady. The men moved with care, but without fear. Now, fear had no work left to do here. The rearmost of the convoy's hulls let out a long, pleased creak as the tide lifted it a finger's breadth. I stood for a moment longer with my hand on the pier's rail. Salt had dried in a frill along the grain. I ran a finger through it and let it fall, then turned to Aram. "You can go home," I said. "Sleep in your own bed tonight." He nodded fast, relief and pride making a small light in his eyes. "My wife will say my bell woke the sea," he said. "Tell her it woke the day," I said, and he smiled in the direction of the water as if it were a person and could take the compliment. The gulls lifted as one, circled and settled again. The convoy took the river's curve slowly. Oars dipped in rhythm. No rush, just the steady business of getting where one must go. The surf at the river's mouth blended with the whisper of the tide against the stones, and I felt the chair under me before I had quite left the pier. The lantern's glow softened into hearthlight. The fog's breath became the gentle wheeze of my old kettle, admitting it had done enough for one night. Penelope's paw was warm across the leather of my shoe. Her beagle snore a soft soar across the quiet. I did not move at once. The Bulla Niketas had sent lay where I had left it, on the edge of the blotter. In the morning light, it looked like what it was, a small, heavy piece of lead that had traveled centuries in a sealed life. I picked it up and ran a thumb along the rim. 3 faint scrapes. The same pattern I had watched Niketas read. I lifted it to my nose and breathed in as a man tastes a soup to see if someone remembered the sort. A ghost of resin clung to the thong, the kind a careful notary dabs on leather to ease a knot. The waking world and the dream had agreed on their details. That is always a comfort. I smiled at that, a quiet thing just for myself, and fetched a small stick of honest wax. No scent but bees and old sunlight. I melted a circle of it to seal a packet of notes I had made for an old friend who liked to argue about the edges of history. The blob cooled quickly, taking the stamp of my plain ring with no flourish. The simple seal was enough. The day beyond the window was gentle rain and confidence. No alarms, no calls in the street. The sort of day that lets a man who has been awake too long give himself back to the chair for a little while. Outside, in the large world, men rolled up tents at Antioch and made ready for Jerusalem. That road would ask for more than paper. It would ask for blood. I cannot stop a tide that size with a thumb, but I can sometimes make sure the chart it reads is honest. Rest drifted in like an incoming tide. I let it, with thanks. The kettle sighed and settled. Penelope gave a small, contented grunt and pushed her nose against my ankle. I leaned my head back and let the warmth in the room climb my shoulders. The house made its familiar old sounds. Wood easing, rain measuring itself along the sill, the clock's heartbeat counting gently and then forgetting to count for a beat and beginning again. All that remained was to sink. The river at St Symeon ran calm now in my mind. I watched it from somewhere low and close, the way a child watches the undersides of boats in a harbor while lying on a warm plank. The oars' blades cut the water and left soft commas that closed behind them without fuss. A rope rubbed on a beam and murmured like someone speaking in another room, too far to make out words. The bell on Aram's donkey, far off but constant, sounded every few breaths, a small brass voice reminding the morning that time is more circle than line. A gull floated lazy on a rising line of air, then drifted down. The crease where the river gave itself to the sea opened and closed like a sleeper's mouth. No hurry. Tide in, tide out. If the human world tried to shout, the river did not object. It simply carried the sound out and laid it down on the sand where the next wave smoothed it away, wood-remembered hands. Every plank in the pier had a warm story left in it by men who had lifted and tied and laughed and sworn. Those stories stacked softly, and the weight of them pressed gently, not hard, just enough to remind the body that beds are not the only places that hold us. The fog that was a worry before dawn became a blanket after. It tucked around the masts and lay on the water. It did not hide men from each other anymore. It wrapped the morning the way a friendly coat wraps shoulders that have done their work. Somewhere, a mule chewed and then stood still with its eyes half closed. Somewhere else, someone stirred a pot slow enough that the spoon drew a figure 8 and left a path that filled again. A door went shut with a soft, final click, the kind that says, "There, that is enough. We can keep the wind out now." My own room answered those far sounds with its own small choir. The clock ticked, paused, remembered itself, and ticked again. The rain found its rhythm and settled in. The coals in the grate gave a faint, satisfying shift as they relaxed into each other. Penelope's breath synchronized with mine in that comfortable way old companions have, the two of us making a pattern without trying. You can feel your jaw loosen when you listen to water. Let it. You can feel your shoulders stop holding on to a weight that is no longer there. Let them. The world does not require your grip this minute. I am content to hold the handle of the case alone, and even I have set it down now, within easy reach where it can look after itself until morning. The papers are safe, the seals are honest, the reliquary rests. Emperor Alexios will receive his charters as he expects. Bohemon's men will march without the taste of betrayal on their tongues, and the road to Jerusalem will run straight through the day like a bright thread. Somewhere far off, Matteo will weigh his next move and perhaps for once sit with the idea that not all profit must be taken in the night. These are not your burdens, they are only points of light, soft and distant, telling you that the story is at peace for now. Let your breath slow and lengthen as oars rise and fall in your mind. Feel the chair hold you, the ground hold the chair, the earth hold the ground. If thoughts come like gulls crying, let them pass by and settle on some other roof. You can lie back like fog over water and spread without effort. If you wish, listen once more for Aram's bell. One small note rolling over the water, then another, then a third, each farther away, each a little softer, each a little closer to the edge of sleep. Good night. Close your eyes. Rest now. I will wait here and keep the quiet for you.